Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast. This is Ben Kinney with season 2, joined here with Chad Himes and Bob Stewart. This season, we are talking about winning. And Chad, this is a very, very special series of episodes that we have. In fact, we're going to call it a series. What's the name of the series?
Traits of a Winner.
Winning. Woo! Now, traits of a winner. Tell us how the format goes.
Traits of a Winner. We're going to take you, our audience, through the 6 traits of a winner as figured by the Win, Make, Give research team. And on the first episode of the week, we are going to discuss the topic. And on the second episode of the week, we're going to have an interview with an expert, Ben, in an area that we believed really features the trait we're studying.
Hold on a second. Hold on. Research team? Like, nobody told me that we had a research team. I've been doing all my own research.
Whoops.
Bob, you are the research team. Thank you.
He figured it out, Ben.
No, I'm pretty excited because we're interviewing some phenomenal individuals that have contributed a lot to the world society and have had amazing levels of success or winning, as we call it. Give us some examples of some of the industries that we're talking to.
Sure. Well,
people.
Ben, we talked about, we spoke with a Paralympic athlete, gold medal winner in our last episode that just dropped. We hope you go back and check that out. We've got surgeon. We've got astronaut. We've got an Army Ranger. We've got a firefighter. And Ben, nobody seeks knowledge more than a professor.
Ooh,
so we got a professor coming to you later this week.
Awesome. So, seeking knowledge. Hey, Chad, tell me a little bit about a winner. And what does a winner never do?
A winner never claims they have the answer.
Yeah.
Okay? They know that there isn't just one way to do something, Ben.
Yeah, at least there's not a permanent answer.
Correct.
Yeah. Basically, what we're saying is that if you want to win at a high level and you want to have the traits of the winner, you have to adopt this philosophy that says there's always more to learn.
Yes, never stops.
We are going to live a life of being a student, most likely in all areas of our life.
I think it goes even a little bit deeper than that. To me, it's about remaining humble. Right? I mean, there's an element of humility in this, in the idea that, like, I don't know everything. I mean, Ben, you in one of the industries that we're in, like, you literally have the top team in the United States. Like, you're actually at the pinnacle. But even there, you don't claim to know it all, right? You sold more houses last year than anybody else, but you still realize, like, and there's a certain level of humility there. It's not just like realizing that I don't have all the answers. I believe it's a little bit deeper than that.
Remember when that nuclear power reactor in Japan cracked a couple years ago and leaked all that, right, radioactive material out into the ocean or whatever that might be?
Yep.
They made a mistake. The mistake that they made is that they built that reactor to be able to withstand the largest earthquake that was ever recorded in Japan's history.
Right.
What's the problem with that mentality?
They didn't realize that a bigger earthquake could happen.
Yeah. And so when we think we know everything, we're assuming that we've encountered everything that we have to encounter in our industry, in our sport, in our lives, right? It's just not the case. There's always something in front of us that we can learn from. So we went out there and we said, well, who's done a lot of research and studied what seeking knowledge is about. And this episode is about becoming a student and seeking knowledge. And Chad found this guy, super weird, James T. Mangan.
Mangan, yeah.
Yeah, and he's an author, or used to be. He passed away a long time ago. Born in 1896, died in 1970. He was a very eccentric, best-selling author. He wrote a lot of self-help books. He also, Chad, publicly claimed ownership of outer space in 1948.
Brilliant!
Who even knew you could do that? Trademark outer space, that's mine. You're trespassing, please pay rent.
We should give Dave credit because Dave, when we were talking about this before, Dave said, well, that's really smart because who's going to dispute that claim? Like, who's going to say, no, I own outer space? You're smart, Dave.
Yeah, I like that. Anyway, so we're going to dig into some of the strategies that James shared, decades and decades ago.
Yes, because they're still appropriate today.
Yeah. Now, the first one's funny because the first one he said is somebody who's going to have this trait, this habit of seeking knowledge. Number one, they practice. Now, we covered the crap out of that last week,
Sure
right?
did,
We've nailed the practice thing in a coffin. We buried it 6 feet under. But those who seek knowledge don't just see it once; they see it and they practice it on a more continual basis, right?
So as Ben's saying, folks, we just covered that. Go back 2 episodes if you haven't listened yet, where we launched our Traits of a Winner series, and check out the conversation on practice.
So the second one he said was desire. And Chad, you wrote, we say a lot of things. We learn a lot of useless trivia. But what you need is you need to have a desire to want to learn something. Why is that important?
Well, because when you mean it, Ben, you're going to find a way to actually learn it, right? We all know that person who knows everything. We all know the Cliff Clavin, right? The guy who has all the trivia
Who
answers.
are people that have never been in my kitchen?
Correct. That is accurate, right? And for those of you who haven't gotten Cheers reference, go back and watch one of the greatest sitcoms ever, in my opinion. Ben, we can all learn a lot of trivia, but unless we're going to be on Jeopardy and that's our plan to know all that stuff, we have to really want to learn something. I want to learn about health. You want to learn about wealth and are sharing it with everybody, right? We want to learn about winning here, and so does our audience, and that's why they're with us. But you've got to have the desire to want to learn it.
One of my friends, a female, said something relatively sexist, but I relate to it, so I'm going to share what she said. And this is not coming from me, a guy, right. Everybody. So
made up a female friend.
No, it was actually a close friend, Melina, and Melina said, "You know what? Women are like a plate of spaghetti. Our thoughts and our ideas intertwine, and they go from place to place to place." She said, "Guys are like a waffle square. Like when they get stuck in that little tiny waffle square and they can't get out, and they keep going deeper and deeper and deeper." Well, I don't know if this is a guy or girl thing, Melina, but I do know this is something that I can relate to, because I get in a waffle square at night. It might be about fossils, and I'll spend the rest of the night till 4 a.m. reading about fossils or old cars or posters or some guy that I read about or some history of whatever.
I did this with Mylar sheaths recently. Mylar sheaths. I know.
Right? You get stuck in the waffle square. So got to have a desire. And I have a thirst and a hunger for learning new things as long as they interest me.
That's it. And the desire.
I feel like we're all of us are of the same age range, right? Where
Sure.
we grew up in a time where you could have an argument with your friends about something stupid and nobody really could find the answer. And
Yes.
and now we've got every answer at our fingertips. Like that's part of what drives like my curiosity and my seeking of knowledge, is that idea that like I remember when we couldn't have every answer or couldn't at least go try to find them, right? You guys all have encyclopedias. Like, did somebody, a neighbor, a grandparent have the encyclopedias?
We had the set.
Oh, man, I used to read some encyclopedias with my cousin, but
Goodness.
that stuff's at your fingertips today, right?
Yes. Seeking knowledge is something we still have to be purposeful about because so much knowledge is at our fingertips. But a lot of that is trivial knowledge.
Tell us about the next one, Jed.
The next one is you have to ask. And ask stands for always seek knowledge. Right? Yeah, right. So it's right there. So we have to always be asking.
Wait, did you make that up, or is that really what ask means?
Well, it doesn't really mean that, Bob.
I thought maybe this came from like the Latin for
always seek knowledge is ask, right? So we go through this as we grow up, right? And forget the terrible twos because we get to what, the fact-finding fours.
I have one of those.
And
right
Bob,
now.
you've got that right now, right? What are they doing running around the house screaming at you all the time?
Why, how, when, dad, where, when, blah. Yeah.
And what do most parents say? And most parents would tell their kids, stop asking, right? And we're taught at an early age not to ask because we get punished for it when we ask, when we come from curiosity.
Yeah, Chad, sometimes we do these, we do the recordings of these things. And so on Friday, we're going to hear an interview that we do with a professor. And we talk in that interview about like we talked about his kids and him taking them all the way to the very end of whatever that why is, Dad, right? Why? And he gave the example of like, why are plants green? And it's chloroform and it's,
they'll tire out soon enough, but he at least trained them to ask. And of course, that's why I asked him that question, knowing what we were going to talk about here. And as we talk about asking, almost everyone is more than willing to share what they know to anyone who asks sincerely. I mean, Ben, you're a master of this. You have so much knowledge, and you are naturally a teacher. And Bob, we just did a little thing on Facebook. We both found out that our life path is teaching as well, right? Have you ever not answered a question when someone comes to you sincerely and asking about how something works, something goes on? If you know the answer, you stop. People love to talk, and asking them a question is a great way to get them to talk, and it'll strengthen relationships.
I was reading an article the other day, funny enough, about children asking questions. And they said, well, how do you get your kids to stop the 4-year-old that you called it?
Fact-finding fours?
Yeah. You simply respond back to your children with, well, what do you think? Every single time. Well, what do you think? Because it teaches them to think instead of just
question.
Well, now you know, Bob.
What's more powerful, your ability to think or your ability to ask great questions?
Both. I think you need to have both skills. You need to have the ability to reason.
I'm gonna start doing that. I'm alternating between plants are green because chloroform, and chloroform's done by the sun, and why, Dad? And I mean that can go on for a long time. And I do actually play that game with my kids, and my wife laughs at me because she's like, they don't know what you're talking about, and I'm like, I don't care. They'll get it eventually. And I think it's just a good skill to develop in them. But I'm gonna start using your tactic. What was that again? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, what do you think? Why do you think plants are green?
I mean, at 4, I'm going to get some real pie in the sky answers.
Yes, you will.
You should probably record it. It'll be hilarious. We'll have a whole episode on it. So, Chad, so far we've said the secret to the traits of a winner of seeking knowledge is practice.
Yep.
Desire.
Yep.
Asking.
Yep.
What's the next one?
Experimenting.
Ooh.
So this is going to go right along what you just said, Ben. You segued us right into that, right? What do you think? Okay. So go find out, right? Think about the things that happened. Benjamin Franklin. We all think Benjamin Franklin when we're talking about this, right? He experimented with a kite and learned about electricity.
Pasteurization came from the same thing.
Correct, right? He was experimenting with bacteria and figured out how to make cow's milk survive for us.
Duct tape, sticky notes. Like there's a million examples of experimentation that actually created byproducts or discoveries that led to all the things that we have today.
So that's how we seek knowledge. We got to experiment because you never know what's going to come from.
So what do we experiment with?
Well, you've got your time.
Yep.
You got your money.
Yep.
You got sweat equity.
Yep.
And you'll start and the people around you. I mean, really, I'd go back to the control triangle, Ben, and you can experiment with each of those stages along your control triangle.
Yeah. Okay. Next one. Looking inside yourself. Tell me about that.
Okay, so this is an interesting one. Bob and I were talking about this just before we started the recording. There's actual knowledge stuck inside you. So I'm going to go to 1968 here, right? And I'm going to go to the Journal of American Medical Association that Marshall Nivenberg from the National Heart Institute provided insight that within our DNA, there is knowledge. And he wrote an article called Genetic Memory where he talked about this. And the example he used in the animal kingdom, because there's so many examples there, was that monarch butterflies each year make a 2,500-mile journey from Canada to a plot of land in Mexico where they live for the winter. In spring, they start going back north. So we can all figure that out. The thing is, it takes them 3 generations to do it. So no butterfly has ever made the full journey before. Yet somehow they actually know what they're doing. It's like GPS is built into them. So when we're little, this shows up. Bob was saying to me, well, give me an example where it works for us. And I said, well, when you were young, you didn't have to learn how to breathe. It was just in your DNA that your body knows how to breathe. You didn't have to really learn how to walk. Did you get some help? Sure. But you didn't have to learn how to walk. We just stood up and started walking as our bodies got older. We learned how to do many of the things that are natural to us because it's just in our DNA already. So sometimes just look inside yourself because there might be something that you're not paying attention to, a feeling that you already know the answer to it.
Are you getting like spiritual on us? Like
a little spiritual there for you, Bob. Okay.
All right, next one. Get a different perspective. It's like a beach ball, right? If you're looking at the beach ball, what's the color of the beach ball?
Depends how close I'm looking at it.
Yeah, it depends on where you're standing, right? Absolutely. Just like a tree, right? Depends on where you're standing. You got to walk around it to get all perspectives. To really acquire knowledge, you got to walk around, travel, ask questions, ask other people, so that you can get a full perspective, to see everything from different angles.
And how many times do you bring somebody in that you're like, this is what I see? I need a perspective, and I can't see a different perspective because I'm so locked in on one. You'll bring Bob in or Dave in, or you'll bring in someone else from the team that has a different perspective or a user angle that they're looking at something because you're seeking an answer. You sometimes need to get that different perspective from within or without.
Somebody smart said, the narrow mind stays rooted in one spot. The broad mind is free.
Say it again, Ben.
The narrow mind stays rooted in one spot. The broad mind is free.
Nice.
What's important is we understand that perspective is created from past experiences, from present experiences, and from looking into the future. And some people have an ability to look into the future and help us out. And some people have an ability to share what's going on right now. And some people, our parents, other business leaders, our old bosses, whatever that might be, they have a perspective of what they've already gone through. So we need to make sure that we are seeking perspective from all these different types of people that have different experiences.
Some of us are predisposed, I think, to like being the type that, well, if that happened that way before, like it's definitely going to turn out like that again. Maybe that's a pessimist or something, but whereas the optimist is like, all right, it's happened like that, but maybe there's another way it could turn out, right? We were seeing it in a different perspective.
Andy Stanley, he's a pastor, but he also has a leadership podcast, has a podcast episode, which I highly recommend, called The Dangers of Autonomy. And The Dangers of Autonomy talks about how some people set themselves up in a position where everybody that's giving them information is on their payroll, or everybody that's giving them information is afraid of them. And they don't get a different perspective because they're all just me tooing everybody. Oh yeah, Bob's smart. Bob looks good. He's smart, right? And everybody just pats him on the head. That's not a different perspective. To have a great perspective, to learn knowledge from other people, they have to be free to tell you what they think. They can't have a fear of losing their job or losing their friendship or you being offended.
One of the ways that people win with you, if I'm not mistaken, if we go back to that episode, was that people are willing to bring you a different perspective because you want that and you're looking for that. And if everybody surrounds you as just a yes man, you'll never get a different perspective.
You do something, Ben, and I don't know if this is by design or if this just kind of is a natural byproduct of the process of potentially earning an opportunity in our world. But we're looking to fill a couple of positions, and a number of those people have come. I've interviewed them, or they've shadowed me in some different things. And one of the things that you have them do is, after they've shadowed me, is to give you feedback on what they watched and saw and learned, and how they might tweak it. And so you're looking even in the interview process to get this different perspective from somebody outside of our organization who's putting fresh eyes on something that we've been doing the same way for a long time and maybe have gotten stale in it. So there are lots of ways to get a different perspective. It doesn't have to be you're doing it as part of our interview process, for goodness sake.
Wow, absolutely. Next one, Chad.
Reading. So Ben, we've talked about this on other episodes, and it's don't just read, it's read with a purpose, right? Because we want to make sure that we pay attention to what we're reading. It's not just sitting back and skimming through some pages. We have to look purposefully and read purposefully, because then you can find value anywhere. Books, magazines, articles, blogs, newspapers even, they still have value.
Yeah, I think one of the more famous leadership authors in the world is John Maxwell.
Yes.
And he writes incredible books, and I enjoy him. However, if you only read John Maxwell books, you would get stuck in his perspective.
Yes.
Right? So although I highly recommend his books, I would also say you need to go find 4 or 5 other opinions or thoughts or experiences, and then come up with your own.
I'm doing that right now. That's a great point. I didn't even really think about, Ben, because I believe a certain thing about nutrition, and someone challenged me to read a book about intermittent fasting. I'm not agreeing with anything that's being said in the book, yet I'm at least getting a different perspective on it so that I can come out with better knowledge on the other end.
Yeah, we don't want to get stuck on our waffle square and only read the same stuff by the same person.
Yeah, you can turn anything into a food reference. That is impressive.
Yeah.
Even if it's not you are indeed that from Molina, but you're like, ooh, food reference. I'm using that at some point
It's
soon.
directly related to my BMI.
And Bob brings everything back to basketball, so we're good.
Yeah. So if you're going to make a habit of seeking knowledge, you have to make a commitment to go out and find it. And one best of the way to do it is read. Now, here's what's funny. I'm not particularly a great reader, and I don't particularly enjoy reading, which most people wouldn't assume by the stacks of books and the amount of books that I consume in a year. Here's how I do it. I believe that I can read for 15 minutes without being distracted.
Okay.
And I know that I can do that 2 to 3 times a day. So I read what would be long for a lot of people, 45 minutes to an hour every day, but I do it in 10 to 20 minute increments, 2 to 3 times a day. Right?
Meanwhile, I'm the opposite. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to need to read an hour, or I'm going to feel like I'm not getting into the flow of what I'm reading to pull the information from.
Yeah, all strategy, right?
If you think back at our practice episode that we just went through,
Ben's
you're
smarter than I
basically
am.
breaking yours down, right?
Yep.
Ben's breaking his down. He knows his attention span's 6 minutes, I think is what the study said, right? But he's got a certain amount of attention span, maybe even a certain amount of time, and he's just breaking it up throughout the day.
Yep.
Here's the problem is that if we said, hey, everybody here listening to the podcast needs to read for an hour, our number one thing we'd say is we don't have an hour. Yeah. But if I said, do you have 15 minutes in the morning, everybody would say, yeah. If I said, do you have 15 minutes at night before you go to fall asleep, they would say, yeah. Just out of curiosity, at lunch, could you take 10 or 15 minutes, right, instead of scrolling the socials and read for 10 or 15 minutes? Yeah, then everybody actually does have 45 minutes to an hour. Just depends on how you break it up.
Absolutely.
Right. All right, next one.
Well, I want to say it's the opposite of reading, yet it's not, but that's writing, right? You got to write so that people have things to read. Reading is great. The writing, you have to make sure to figure out what you're looking for to help you put it onto paper, right?
There's a way that we could explain something live and draw and use our hands like Bob does, flailing around
Absolutely.
like a fish on the dock, right? That everybody would be like, oh, I get that, and they would be entertained. However, that same verbiage, if we transcribed it, would not make a good learning experience on paper. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just like podcast isn't the same as a video, and video isn't the same as in writing, you got to find different ways to explain things.
Yep.
And you have to learn things in different ways. Sometimes I read books on topics that I consider myself an expert in simply because I want to find out how they explain it.
Sure.
It just makes sense to me, like, oh, that's actually a really great way in writing to explain that particular subject that I may have been fine explaining on a class with a whiteboard.
Yep. How many times have you written something down to remind yourself later, but you never needed to go back to the piece of paper because once you wrote it down, you remembered it, right? So if we're seeking knowledge and we're sitting there and we're writing it, we're going to be able to lock it into our head. And sometimes you just need to write it to be able to figure it out. How many times I'm horrible at spelling. I mean, the greatest invention for me is the spell check on my computer and the squiggly line that shows up. But how many times does somebody say, hey, how do you spell whatever word it is?
Write it out.
And I got to write it out to be able to see it. I'm seeking the knowledge and putting pen to paper to be able to process it.
I think an important skill that I've done in writing is I write a lot of notes in my phone. And what I found on the notes application of your phone, you can actually go back there and search. I can't go search through all my notebooks or journals or anything like that, but I could go in there one day and say, hey, I was thinking about talking about compound interest. I could type in there compound interest, or I could type leadership or emotional intelligence or whatever that might be. And it pulls up all my notes from the last 10 years that I've ever written, right? And it's just right there and I can access it.
Smart.
Yeah.
Smart.
Now, last but not least, Jed.
Just watch it, right? Ben, check this quote out. Life is a show and admission is free. If only you would pay attention.
Mindfulness. You guys talk about this in the 15-point plan, right?
Yes.
I don't know, just awareness. We talk about that in the emotional intelligence series, right? In many ways, this is just being aware of what's going on around you, watching, like you say, or the pitfalls of others, right? Like, what can we learn from just observing what's happening around us?
Absolutely, because we can watch people be lazy, or we can watch people that are active. We can watch people failing. We can watch people succeed. And we're going to learn knowledge from it either way. And it doesn't matter what choice they make. We are going to gain knowledge watching them make those choices to make better choices in the future.
Like, I watch you ride your Peloton. I'm like, oh, I know I'm not doing that.
I remember watching Ben, as he
Not on a Peloton.
I would watch Ben as he would teach classes. And then I would learn, oh, well, that worked really well in front of an audience. okay, so I now learned and I've gained the knowledge that I'm going to use that. Or, oh, that doesn't work for me, so that wasn't going to come across, but at least I still gained the knowledge of don't do that. That's a Ben thing.
I think this is a big one, right? Seeking knowledge by emulating essentially or watching somebody that does that thing you'd like to do. Or, I mean, Ben's a great example. He uses people's names. We do a lot of calls where there's 100 people or 200, 500 on the call, and he doesn't know any of these people, or he knows a few of them, but man, he's on the game for calling people out by their name. And he'll even just drop names in, as like, he'll say, what do you think about that, Susie? And she'll watch her snap to attention or whatever, but that's something I picked up from watching him do it. And it just holds the audience's attention a little bit better. And yeah.
And it goes with reading in that regard. I can't necessarily watch John Maxwell as the example you gave as he's leading. Yet I can read what he writes so I can learn it. And then sometimes I get the opportunity to watch. So those three really, to me, tie together when it comes to seeking knowledge.
To kind of wrap this up, the job of a winner is not to have the answer. It's not to know everything. The job of the winner is to be committed to finding the answer. Just like the job of a leader is to not have an answer to everything their people need, but be willing to walk hand in hand, side by side with these people until you actually find it. So as we go through the traits of a winner, which is our series now, and we talk about seeking knowledge, it's important that we practice, that we have a desire to learn the subject, that we ask, which Chad says means always seek knowledge, that we experiment, that we look inside ourselves, we get a different perspective, that we read, that we write, and that we watch others so that we can learn. At the end of the year, we should ask ourselves, how are we smarter, wiser, and more knowledgeable than we were a year ago? And if you don't have a great answer for that, gosh, you really did just waste a year.
And if you don't have a great answer for that, hopefully you just listen to how to seek knowledge so that you can find the answer to that.
Now, Chad, I think we're actually going to talk to somebody this week that's going to help us on this subject. Who's that?
Yeah, Bob mentioned it. We have done an interview with Dr. Greg Marshall from Texas State, and he is, entertaining. I mean, I laughed through this one. He gave us some great stuff, and you're going to love it because this is a guy who's been doing it for
over 40 years and at a really high level in academia, right? Like the pinnacle of learning.
They are seeking knowledge each and every day. So we really hope that you have subscribed to the Win, Make, Give podcast so it automatically pops up when we drop that next episode on Friday for you. And between now and then, we hope that you'll go leave us a review if you haven't. You'll rate the podcast if you haven't, and you'll share the podcast with a friend so they can seek knowledge along our journey. Visit us at facebook.com/group/win, make, give. And until our next episode, do good.